Hey, I'm Jana, the little sister.
And I'm Jeff, her big brother. Welcome to Sibling Rivalry, a podcast about our favorite sport, baseball.
This week on Sibling Rivalry Baseball, I'm seeing blue, Roger blue, and Jeff is seeing red.
I'm going to invite Mike Trout over to watch the playoffs. Again. Maybe he can help me with the SRBB headlines.
The Kansas Comet, Gale Sayers, passed away at the age of 77 after a battle with dementia. He was one of the most electrifying running backs and kick returners in NFL history. He was the youngest player inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. His legacy also includes his close relationship with teammate Brian Piccolo. Their friendship was documented in the Emmy-winning movie Brian's Song.
Pac-12 football will begin on November 6th. The decision voted on by the Pac-12 CEO group. The move comes after the Big Ten announced it will begin playing in late October.
5 NFL teams and their coaches face over $1 million in fines. The New Orleans Saints, Las Vegas Raiders, Seattle Seahawks, Denver Broncos, and San Francisco 49ers all face $250,000 fines because their head coaches either did not wear a mask or wore it improperly. Each head coach also will be fined $100,000.
And the MLB 2021 draft will be held during All-Star Week in Atlanta. This is the first time the draft will be held in July. It will consist of 20 rounds over 3 days. You can find these and past week's headlines on our website, siblingrivalrybb.com. Remember to rate and subscribe wherever you listen, and tell a friend to listen to the Sibling Rivalry Baseball Podcast. All right, that's it. It's over. A whole season of baseball, albeit only 60 games. And I know some people said it was for a sprint. A couple of teams, like the Dodgers and the Rays, made it look like it was just a stroll in the park. And we know it's going to be different because the playoffs are different, but like the whole environment is different. You've got bubbles coming up. The NBA finals are just now starting. So you got that going on. Normally at this time of year, you have early football, baseball playoffs starting, and then the Lakers or the Heat are getting ready to begin their title defense from last season, but they don't start their actual season till the end of October. Hockey, the same. The Tampa Bay Lightning would be preparing to defend their Stanley Cup championship, and the Dallas Stars would be looking to get revenge for losing in the Stanley Cup championship. And I would be most every Sunday watching Red Zone so I could see my two favorite teams. So it's going to be a crazy October, not only with those other sports, with the NBA finals going on, with the NFL, one of the greatest times in the baseball season. And it's going to be exciting, but it's going to be weird.
It's going to be weird. It's going to be nonstop baseball. When the playoffs start, it is going to be a game at 10, a game at 12 or 1, and then 3, 4. I mean, it's like clockwork. It's a lot of baseball compacted into several days. And the first series is the wild card series. Now, we've had the wild card before, but it's always just been those 2 teams. This time, it's 8 teams. They're all in the wild card, and it's a 3-game series, which for some teams will be okay. For others, it might not bode as well.
Well, you figure the 3 games are all in one park. There's no travel as far as that goes. 2 games in one game in another park. Now, there is a chance to have a couple of extra days off because the next rounds don't start till the 5th and 6th of October, the AL on the 5th, the NL on the 6th. So if you come out, especially because the American League starts first, if they come out and just bam, get the first 2 out of the way, there are no games scheduled for the weekend. So that gives them time to collect up their things and leave because nobody will be playing at home for the playoffs. After this first round, they'll be heading either to LA, San Diego, Arlington, or Houston to continue on with the playoffs. The American League, obviously, to the West Coast nationally. And if you're the Dodgers, it works out real well because if they do what many of the experts say, they'll be in Arlington for the rest of the month. If they take the first 2 games, go to Arlington, get settled in, they'll be there until the end of the World Series if it all works out for them that way.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting playoff scenario, what the strategies are, how managers utilize their bullpen, how managers utilize their benches, who plays, when do they play. There's a lot of things up in the air. And I think with some of these teams, I think it's kind of straightforward. I look at like are your first Tampa Bay and the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays, I think, are going to go full force. They're number 8. They're the number 8 seed, and they've got young guys, Vladdy Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Biggio. I think the one guy and they're all like 22, 23. The thing about Buffalo is how's their pitching going to handle those 3 days against Tampa Bay? And will Tampa Bay come in with their pitching? And who are they going to start? Is it going to be Charlie Morton, Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow? Who's it going to be? And going into how quickly, if they get through their 3-game series, like you were saying, then that's a plus for the pitchers and their arms.
Right, because you're going into the next series, which will be 5 games and no days off. So you've got to reset your pitchers and have them ready. I did see that it looks like Blake Snell's probably going to start game 1 for the Rays, and Matt Shoemaker, former Angel, will be starting game 1 for the Blue Jays. And then I think they plan on throwing Ryu the second game versus Glasnow. So some of the pitching matchups are already in. Some of them they're not sure. But like you said, this first 3 games, you want to get through it quick. Get the first 2 and be ready to move on. Give your pitching say your position players are going to play regularly. It's not going to be much of a change. It's going to be a difference. So in those first 2 rounds, actually even in the first 3, you want to get in and out. You want to sweep or as minimum amount of games so that you're pitching, because there'll be no days off until the World Series as far as during the series.
And with the Blue Jays, if you look at Ryu, he has carried that pitching staff, and he pitched on Sunday. They did really well, but he did have some fatigue, some arm fatigue. So will that play a role as they're moving forward for their championship prospects? And the Blue Jays didn't, I mean, they're the 8th seed. They were 32-28. I think they still could, they could always play spoiler, just depending on how some of these teams come out and how hungry they are.
Yeah, that's going to be the key, how much they want. And when you're a lower seed, you got to come out immediately, smack them in the mouth and keep going. Like we were talking about, got to keep your foot on the pedal, no mercy. You got to go hard and fast against them, and you have to take advantage of every single opportunity. So let's take a look real quick at how it actually ended up. In the National League, the Dodgers ended up with the number 1 seed as we expected. Atlanta, the number 2 seed. Chicago, the number 3 seed. San Diego, the 4 seed. So they will all be playing at home. Dodgers versus Milwaukee. Padres versus the Cardinals. Cubs versus Miami. And then Atlanta's playing Cincinnati, which was kind of the surprise team in all of this. So the others, we were pretty sure as time went on how it was going to shake out. There were some moments, and in fact, a couple of things did kind of like on the last day of the season, the Brewers ended up getting in there because the Giants couldn't win and hold on. They kind of collapsed there in the last couple of games. The Brewers, who we thought were out of it early on, showed up. But they've got some issues. They've got some injuries. They're what's his name? Corbin Burns. Is that it? No. Yeah, Corbin Burns. That's it. I kept thinking Corbin Burnson.
Right.
From LA Law.
LA Law.
Major. And I think more because he was in Major League, the movie
right.
Major League. So I kept thinking about him. Arnie Becker was coming to play, but he's out. So how will that affect the Brewers?
Well,
because they're much stronger with him.
Right. And they also have Brett Anderson, who was slated to start, I think, game 3. And he, too, is a question mark right now. Sure. One thing about the Brewers I'm not looking forward to is close-ups of Craig Counsell's face. Just don't want to go there.
Yeah, the only matchup I think for the first game I've seen that's for sure, the two pitchers are for sure, is Trevor Bauer and Max Fried in the Cincinnati Atlanta. And so Max Fried, who'd been kind of on the injured list more or less day to day, but having issues, comes back just in time to start game one. Trevor Bauer, of course, but actually the battle of two Cy Young Award candidates for this season.
Yeah, it'll be a really good game. Max Fried had he kind of tweaked his ankle, didn't really sprain it, but just rolled it maybe, but back in time to start. Hopefully he'll be able to go the distance for the Braves. The Braves have the offensive power. Of course, Trevor Bauer, he's just nasty. And I love the way he's been walking off the mound lately.
He's been cocky, but he's earned his cockiness at this point.
Yeah, right.
And then the other thing about the National League playoffs is that in the end, half of the 8 seeds are all from the Central.
Yeah, and that, with looking back when we were talking about the Central Division, we weren't expecting much from
I think we
the
figured
Central.
1 and 2 would go because that was already set, but they wouldn't get any extras. We figured maybe 3 from the West and 3 from the East.
Right.
At one time, it was even 4 from the West. That's the other thing I wonder about this is that none of these teams have played each other this year. So it's going to be different than, oh, yeah, we saw them for 4 just a couple of weeks ago. It'll be a different look. You're going to see pitchers you haven't seen at least this season, and that changes the dynamic. Will it just be easy because they haven't seen them? Because they're not as familiar. So with the Dodgers and the Brewers, if the Dodgers had played the Padres, or let's say the Giants had made it in, the Giants are very familiar with the Dodgers and have given the Dodgers problems this season. That'll be interesting to see how these games play out with teams that haven't seen each other all season long. All right, so let's take a look at the AL now and how that ended up. And just like the setup for the Dodgers going forward, with the exception of the World Series, the number 1 seed is already in San Diego. So you've got Tampa Bay versus Buffalo, the Blue Jays, and then Cleveland and the Yankees will be taking on each other. Cleveland moved up on that last day. It had been Minnesota, White Sox, Cleveland. And Cleveland had been hanging at third, and it kind of looked like that's where they were going to end up. So they were going to have a wild card, and it would either be Minnesota or Chicago swapping for 1 and 2. Well, in the end, the White Sox lost on that last day to the Cubs. Minnesota lost to the Reds, but Minnesota ended up with the tiebreaker, so they got the division title. But the Indians won. They came back to beat the Pirates on that last day, and they leapfrogged the White Sox. So the White Sox moved down to the 7 seed, and Cleveland was able to grab the 4 seed. So they get to play at home, and they're another team that's going to be hard to beat with that pitching. Although they do have, I would say, the marquee pitching matchup for the American League. We talked Bauer versus Fried. I think this American League matchup is probably even better because you got Shane Bieber going against Garrett Cole to start off their playoffs between
that
the
is
Indians
marquee.
and then Minnesota is the number 3 seed. They'll be taking on the Asterix, who we'll talk about that later, how they ended up in there. But they grabbed the 6th spot as the worst record in the American League, second placers. So they should have been a wild card and not been able to. They're not playing at home. And then on that final weekend, another thing that happened was that the A's moved from the 3 slot to the 2 slot, and the Twins moved down 1, and the A's will be taking on the White Sox. I don't know if I'm the A's that I'm excited about that, but
I wouldn't be.
I think if I'm the A's, I would have much rather taken on the Asterix than to take on the White Sox. The White Sox are going to be starting Lucas Giolito, who had a great year, had a no-hitter, and then of course the home run kings of the American League, pretty much.
Giolito, again, going into the final weekend, he too was having some soreness, arm soreness. So that it's going to be, I mean, you think about, you think 60 games, and at the time it's like only 60 games when we're used to 162. But when you're pitching and you're pitching consistently, that's bound to happen when you get to September, even though they started in late July.
Well, but you get those that you figure this would be 60 games from the beginning of April or the end of March. So it would have been about the end of May. You start seeing some of those little things for some players,
right?
Little thing, and then they're out for a week or two, and then they come back and they're fine. So we might be some of that. I think for a lot of players are just now getting in their groove. So I think we might see some of the best postseason baseball we've ever seen, just from the standpoint they're not as worn out as you normally would be.
Yeah, I think that's really true. We see that with the Dodgers, especially. We've talked about it. We'll talk about it here in a little bit, but how there are some players who did not start off well, but now they're hitting their stride, and luck for them, it's the right time to hit the stride. One of the matchups we didn't mention, it's the Asterix and the Twins, but the Twins have Kenta Maeda going against Zach Greinke. So
yes.
That could be another good matchup.
That was when I looked at the matchups that had been announced, that was my secondary. Bieber versus Cole is by far the best, but based off of Maeda versus Greinke is big more, I think, because of Maeda. Greinke, we know who he is, but we also know that over the last few games, he's had some issues, but he can come out and be lights out and just stop the world. But Kenta has shown he can do that.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what Zach Greinke you get on the mound. What's his mood? He's very moody. So is he going to come out and be full force, or is he going to want to go home, kind of Zach Greinke?
Well, I'm fine if that's the Zach Greinke that shows up and the Asterix, because really with their pitching staff, they've got a couple of young guys. Valdez, who has shown pretty well. I saw him pitch, a couple times against the Angels, and then he pitched against the Dodgers and pitched well. Their pitching is suspect. It does look like their offense is starting to pick up a little bit, but I'm happy if Minnesota just, takes them out in 2 and we don't have to worry about them again for the rest of the.
Yeah, I'm good with that too. One of the things too, when you look at the playoffs and you look at the final standings, you have a team like the Brewers, who throughout the whole season were never above 500, and they week their way in. In fact, they ended up at 483, and also the Cardinals are in there, but they didn't play a full 60 games. So
Trevor Bauer tweeted about that. He was like, wait, how come they don't have to go play 2 more games? Which I get. They were going to be playing the Tigers. It had no bearing on the standings.
Right. It wasn't going to change anything.
If there was a chance them losing 2 to the Tigers would drop them out. And from their standpoint, Cincinnati moving up to the number 2 spot in the Central, then that may have made a difference in who they played and where, and they still would have been on the road. So I don't think it really matters from that. But Trevor Bauer had a few questions, that and how come it is that home team families will be allowed to come watch the games, the playoff games, but visiting families won't. So he said, sorry, Mom and Dad, you're not good enough to come see us pitch.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that until I saw his tweet. I thought it's odd to me, because I figured if they're all there, what's the big deal? You can be socially distanced in the stadium. And we had talked about that on one of our earlier episodes about having fans in the stadium, before we really knew how the season was going to play out. Depending on who the home team was, they would have more fans, and then the away team would have less. So maybe they could do a lottery style for the away team's family.
A lottery. Sorry, Trevor, your parents didn't win the lottery.
They didn't get the scratch off.
They didn't get to the, but this guy that's sitting on the end of the bench that never played during the season or hardly played during the season, his family made it in.
Well, but then that might put pressure on the manager to actually use
Right.
that
See,
player.
that's a whole. So going back
now
to
we're throwing into a lottery baseball instead of survivor baseball.
Now we're opening up another can of worms here with this, as if this playoff thing isn't going to be hard enough overall. So the only two teams, we knew this could happen, but two teams, you mentioned Milwaukee, never had a winning record the whole season. They ended up at 29-31 because they surged late. And then the Asterix, who did spend some time over 500, but ended up with the 29-31 record, make it in by virtue of the fact that they were second place in the West. It's going to be, some of these matchups are going to be great. It's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be weird, though, because with this first round, normally you play the first round with the wild card, and then you start after the wild cards are done, which is usually like the Tuesday or Wednesday in the week. And then the playoffs start Wednesday, Thursday, and they go through the weekend. This coming weekend, there'll be no baseball.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to watch football, and depending on what the schedule is for the Lakers and the Heat, get in some NBA finals as well if you're interested, or you can actually do some non-baseball activities. Read
a book.
Yeah, which has been hard. I've been trying to read books, go outside. I don't know if I want to do that. That's kind of
sketchy.
I saw a cartoon where Charlie Brown and Snoopy are in bed, and Charlie Brown says to Snoopy, "I don't want to get out of bed. It's too people-y out there."
Well, it's funny because Planet Head, he was like, "All right, baseball's over." And I'm like, "Nope, it's still going."
Yeah, baseball is far from over.
It is far from over. It will be interesting to see when you have these teams like we talked about, the Brewers, who didn't have a winning record this whole season, the Asterix, and where these teams all line up, match up. That's the other thing about this World Series, this championship series, is how the team who does win it, will it be as big a deal as if, they went through an entire 162 season? Because you are going to have these teams, the Brewers or maybe the Blue Jays, that could come in and totally spoil everything for these, like Tampa Bay or the Dodgers, who had the best record in baseball.
Which, talking about the Dodgers, I was looking at run differentials, and the Dodgers, let me go back. Run differentials, how many more runs they scored than another team. Atlanta and Tampa Bay, both division winners, their run differential was plus 60. So they outscored overall by 60 runs. The Padres were plus 84, so 24 more. The Dodgers run differential was plus 136. So imagine this, they were the home run champs of the National League. Imagine, though, coming in and the Brewers, because they're on a tear, taking them out, and the Brewers had a negative run differential.
Right. Yeah.
It's all going to be how do those pitchers. That's why we talked about all along here with the playoffs. Pitching is going to be the key. Unless you're scoring 20 more than anybody else, or 52 more than the next team as far as that goes. But it only takes a bad game offensively, and no matter how good your pitchers, you might get beat 1-0 if your offense doesn't pick up. But if your pitching staff gives up a lot of runs and you can't make it up, and it can happen, you can hit those little slumps. And with the way that this is set up, this is really, we talked about it before, that it was supposed to be a sprint. And I said, I think it's more like Survivor. I think I can update that the sprint was those 60 games. The playoffs, with the way that they're set up and the no days off, are going to test how great of a team you really have, top to bottom. And it really will be especially in these first couple of rounds. Survivor Baseball.
It's time for Dodger Baseball.
Well, the Dodgers head into the playoffs. They had the best season record at 43-17. They're the only team to not lose at least 20 games. Only the Tampa Bay Rays were close. They're the only other team that won 40 games this season, but they lost 20. So the Dodgers, and we were just talking about their run differential, the Dodgers have been, and for those of us who watch them every day, and we've lamented about this at times, if you look at only their record and the run differential, you would think that they never had any problems. They never looked bad. That's not true. And sometimes they were deceptively good. They got a hit in the right place, or one of their potential MVPs like Corey Seager or Mookie Betts came up strong. Will Smith came up a few times, and they'd win it, towards the end and then blow somebody out. But it took them till they got to a bullpen. They had problems with certain starters. So there are issues we got to watch, but as a team goes, this is the team you want going into the playoffs.
Oh, yeah. Now, with Dodger pitching, none of the starters have pitched full games, and they haven't pitched 100 pitches. Clayton Kershaw was the only pitcher who, I think it was against San Diego, who threw 99 pitches. That's it. And then when we look at with the Dodgers, they played Oakland in the final week, and they won the series. But again, it all comes down to pitching and how the pitchers are going to be utilized. We did have another bullpen game. We've had several of those where one of the reasons in this series is Julio Urias, when he comes out in the first inning, he gives up a lot of runs and then he settles down. So I think the strategy there was to bring in another pitcher. In this case, it was Joe Kelly. Didn't really work because he gave up 3 runs. But then Julio came in and was good.
Right, 6 innings, 2 hits,
well.
Only gave up 1 run. That was the second game of the series.
Right.
And I think that's one thing. I have to say that during the regular season, overall, bullpen management wasn't bad.
Yeah, it actually has gotten better. Doc has, I think, gotten better. And especially with these younger pitchers, you've got Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin, Julio. Even though Julio has been pitching, put him into that rookie category with Dustin and Tony, but he's giving them a longer leash when they're out on the mound. Whereas in previous seasons, as soon as they ran into trouble, it was to the bullpen, which then overtaxed the bullpen because it was happening, almost every game, or the pitch count. Dave Roberts is really big on the pitch count. So if, say, Tony Gonsolin, he got to 84 pitches, which kind of seemed to be where he was this season, and then that was it. But with Tony Gonsolin, those 84 pitches was into the 6th or 7th inning. So yeah, with Dave Roberts being able to give those pitchers, especially those younger pitchers, that opportunity to get out of a jam, to see where they're going to be, instead of just saying, okay, let's put some bubble wrap on you, send you to the dugout.
We're going to get the guys, the movers, with bubble wrap you up, put you on a dolly and cart you back, put you in one of those space, how they always, when they're going off to Mars in the movies or somewhere, they are all in these chambers in deep sleep. That's what we're going to do with you to preserve you so you don't do anything stupid. Now, Game 1 starter for the playoffs for the Dodgers pitched the last game versus the A's. Mike Fiers, one of my favorite major league players, even though he's on the A's, is simply because he was the informant
That's right. He had the guts to say, "Hey, this is going on and it's not right." Yeah, Walker Bueller actually pitched that third game against Mike Fiers, and it was really good to see Bueller out there. He'd been on the IL with we call it Rich Hill disease with the blister,
Which I
but
read that he reached out to Rich Hill
yes,
to get some advice about how to deal with the blister, and Rich Hill said, I don't have time for you. I'm in the playoffs too, man.
There's a lot of interesting remedies for blisters. One of the things I heard Oral Hershiser talk about is taking a file, and which I can't even imagine, but filing the blister off. It has to be in a certain direction. And just, yeah, other thing. I think I heard even say somebody said you can pee on it. I don't.
Well, isn't that like the cure all for anything? You get stung by a jellyfish or a stingray
Yes,
out on the beach, you pee
pee on
on
it.
it.
I guess it could work
I
for
got a
blisters.
hangnail. Pee on it.
Pee on it.
Wait,
Yeah.
I'm not, my stomach's a little upset. I'm not feeling really good. Pee on it. You'll be all right.
but but Walker Bueller came back and he looked really good. He's going to be the starting pitcher for the Dodgers against the Brewers. I think maybe some people saw that as a surprise. I don't really see it as a surprise. Clayton Kershaw usually always, he's always the opening day starter, and that people always assume, the Dodgers in the playoffs, he's going to be game one starter. But in this case, he's not.
I think they're looking at it as a 2-game series. We throw Walker out there, and then we know what our bullpen's capable of. Then we throw Kershaw out there the second day, and we're done. I mean, That's what they hope. I know that they have more beyond that, but with that whole thing, smack them in the mouth, and while they're trying to figure out what just happened to them, run on by them.
Yeah, sweep the leg.
Pedal to the metal.
Well, and Kershaw pitched the first game. He pitched the first game against A's, and he didn't look great. Was it against the A's or against the Angels?
Bueller pitched the final game in the A's series. Another note I noticed, just as well as the A's, Jesus Luzardo, he pitched in that game in relief, and I think he's going to actually start versus Giolito in the playoffs, game one. So
yeah, I did see that.
And you saw that, I think, across the league before we get into the Dodgers-Angels series, that a lot of guys who probably would have made a start normally during the weekend, once they were in the playoffs, they didn't start them. They had them come in and pitch. So there were a lot of openers, I guess, and then they came in and pitched a couple of innings or more just to get a little work in, so they're not sitting for 10 days, let's say.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So now Kershaw, it was as far as the Angels and Dodgers concerned, a premier pitching matchup. Andrew Heaney, who had been pitching pretty well for the Angels, takes on Clayton Kershaw, and they had almost identical numbers. They both only pitched 4 innings. Both gave up 8 hits. Heaney gave up 5 runs. Kershaw only gave up 4. Heaney gave up 3 home runs, and Kershaw gave up 2 home runs.
Yeah, not a great outing for Clayton. He even said in the post-game interview it wasn't good. But if he's going to have a bad game, let it be this game, because then he can have a good game in the wild card series and going forward. Because that's the other thing with Clayton Kershaw. He's got that monkey on his back, and it's brought up every time. If you're listening to any type of baseball analysis, it's always, how is Kershaw going to get those demons? He's going to exorcise those demons that he has in the playoffs. And for this year, I don't know if those demons will be there, or if they ever really were there, because you have to think too, in 2017, was he a bad pitcher? Or, I mean, there were moments, sure, but can we really put that year into his?
In some ways, yes, but I mean, he didn't have the same issues as, say, Yu Darvish did then. I think it affected him more. But I think the bigger issue with the playoffs and even with Kershaw pitching isn't that he's that bad, because he wasn't overall. He had his moments, but that offensively he got no support, which he would normally get during the regular season. So he is a legend in the regular season, and he's a hero. I know we use GOAT to mean greatest of all time now. So
Yeah.
he's the GOAT of the regular season, and then he's the GOAT in the negative sense in the playoffs, is how it's always played out.
Yeah.
He's not that bad, and you have to look at all the factors. And if your team that normally busts out 10 runs a game is only scoring 2 runs a game, it puts more pressure on you, especially with the pressure that's already there in the playoffs, because you're focused on wanting to win that championship. Of course, this wasn't the case in that game. It almost was. The Angels started off hammering, and then they gave it up. Haney gave up those 5 runs. So at one point you figure they were basically tied at a point. The Angels were actually up 5-4 at one point. And then the wheels fell off their bus. Gratterall came in, gave up the other run. Kershaw gave up 4. Gratterall gave up the 1 and a home run. And then McGee and Floro both threw perfect innings, and they were scoreless after Gratterall. So 5 innings, and they shut them down the rest of the way.
Well, and it didn't hurt that JT came in and hit 2 home runs. And
right, he had the 2 home runs. His replacement, Edwin Rios, hit a home run. He was Edwin Rios hitting home runs.
Yeah,
over the 2 series there.
Yeah, he's got a pretty swing.
So another pitcher that's going to figure heavy into the playoffs, Tony Gonsolin, started game 2.
And he definitely has solidified his spot in the playoffs. I've been saying this for weeks now. Tony Gonsolin is one of my favorites. And it was a Catterday for Tony Gonsolin. And I don't know if you noticed, but after he would get a strikeout, they were doing like a meow after. And I thought at first, I was like, what the heck is that noise? And then I figured it out.
I didn't notice that. I think probably because every time he got a strikeout, I was like, come on, guys. Right.
Yeah, you weren't listening.
That game, there was a little bit of a scare for the Dodgers. Mookie got hit by Julio Teheran. Yes. First inning, first at bat. And so in an abundance of caution, they pulled him out and moved people around, and he set that one out, which was probably fine. They didn't need him that game. As far as, I mean, maybe they did. The Dodgers won 7-6, and Gonsolin gave up 4 runs in that one. Your buddy Alex Wood gave up a couple of runs. He gave up the other 2 to make the 6. In that game, though, one thing that stood out to me was Corey was 0 for 4. And that's a rarity.
Yeah, he's had those moments where he just doesn't hit anything. And that was that game. So hopefully, get it out of his system and let him go. Alex Wood definitely is not made a case to be on the playoff roster. And he has a 1-year deal with the Dodgers. I don't know that he will be with the Dodgers. I would be really surprised if I can't say I'd be really surprised because the way the Dodgers work sometimes. But yeah, I would probably almost be a little bit disappointed if they pick him up, because he just is, his everything, every time, when he comes in, he'll get a strikeout here or there, but he's given up the runs. And if he's coming out of the bullpen, you can't chance it. And you can't say, okay, well, we're going to give him a chance. Dave Roberts is big on that. We saw him do that with Gavin Lux and say, okay, you've got a runway to play. Show me. But one thing I have noticed with Dave Roberts, especially in this season, and I don't know if it's because it's a 60-game season, but, I talked about giving those pitchers more of the opportunity to get out of jams, but also these other players that, like Gavin Lux, that just aren't hitting well, opportunities to go in and play. He wasn't playing well defensively either. So he might be on the playoff roster as someone off the bench, but if he's not, it wouldn't surprise me. Another one is Jock Peterson, Jocelyn. He's just had a rough season, had some
He's got the
family
issues off the field.
Yeah, not
After
quite.
and the question has been what did happen, because he had the birth of his child, which was a short thing. We've seen that a lot this season, a lot of players across MLB. But then all of a sudden, nobody's talking about it. If anybody knows, they're not reporting it, which on one side of it, that's fine. He deserves his privacy. On the other side, you kind of wonder, though, because they're saying maybe he'll have to leave the team again.
Yeah, it's for me, because I have an inquiring mind and I just want to know. And don't go to Twitter to figure it out, because it'll make you even more crazier. But I mean, he does well in the postseason. I know they want him to be there, but it could just be for the wild card round, and then he might have to leave again. So we'll see what happens with Jocelyn.
In the last two games of the series, he hit a home run in that game 2. Game 3, he, along with CT3 and Kike, they provided the other half of the offense that day, each of them with a hit and a run scored. In that game, we'll talk about the pitching, because it was a quasi bullpen game, but AJ Pollock, he provided half of it. He went 3 for 3.
Yep.
2 home runs, 3 RBIs.
Well, it's interesting that last game with the Angels, you had a bullpen pitcher play in a position player role, and that was Adam Kolarek, and he played right field for starting in the 8th inning.
But he didn't get to bat.
Yeah.
That's probably how they worked it out.
Sad.
But
yeah, probably was part of the whole thing. Okay, you're gonna play, and he's played in the outfield, and I think at second base when he was in college. He went to the University of Maryland, the Terrapins. But that you could see that going forward. That could be something that they're just using every option availability to get the job done. And
in
this case,
position players can pitch, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not well, but
unless you're Russell Martin.
Right. And then the other thing in that game, Corey, 0 for 4.
Yeah. And
so back-to-back games of no hits, which isn't a big deal based on his whole season. He too is an MVP candidate along with Mookie.
Yeah. One of the things too that I'm liking and that I'm seeing is when Cody Bellinger was coming up, especially in the beginning of the season, and you could tell he was struggling. He was working with his bat stance, trying to figure out something new, and that wasn't working. Now he's, gone back, like, I don't need to do that. But he's hitting home runs, but he's also getting those hits, a single, a double when the team needs it. But the biggest thing is he's being patient in the box. He'll take a 10-pitch walk or more in some cases, and he's not trying to swing for the fences. So he's becoming more disciplined. So if he had to struggle at the beginning of the season, and I know all of the Dodger fans were lamenting about Cody and how this is just bad. If it's made him a more disciplined hitter, then going forward, I really think he can only just get better. Maybe it also shows maturity too, as he's playing more and also seeing that he doesn't have to. While a Cody home run is awesome, getting that single, getting that base hit, or a walk in a lot of cases is all he needs.
Yeah, and really when you look at the end result of the season and the struggles that that Max had, I was interested to find out, like I said, he was on pace for his regular strikeouts for a season, that his hack rate of things that he's swinging at was actually down
Yeah.
compared to previous seasons. So there were things in there that on the surface looked below average, but some of them were just regular average. And when you looked at it, when you look at the season as a whole piece of work, they made it past those things. The problem is, though, and here maybe it's going to change. They struggled through the regular season, and the playoffs will actually be where they excel. Or will it be same old where people just fall apart when it comes time to the playoffs? But for them, they're in a good spot because what if Max and Cody are both coming back up and Corey has a bad playoff?
Right.
The
Yeah.
one guy I think that they need to make sure is consistent all the way across, or that they hope is AJ Pollock, because he's been the guy who's quietly contributed more than the numbers would show. I don't know about you. I would say, and we'll talk more about this in a future episode. We'll wrap up the season. But if there's one real big surprise based on what he's done previously, AJ Pollock's one that I would put right there. All right, so let's look at the playoffs. They're going up against the Brewers. We know initially Walker Buehler's game 1, Kershaw's game 2 as scheduled now. Do you see, based on the players that are on the roster, is there anybody that you don't see being carried over? Position player wise, pitching wise, I would think they're going to hold as many pitchers as they possibly can.
The only pitcher that I think is Alex Wood. I don't think he benefits from that. Doesn't benefit the Dodgers to have him in the bullpen. But Doc being Doc, he'll probably be there. But I don't think he's earned that spot. I know he had injuries, back injuries, which he had coming from when he was with the Reds. But I don't think he should be in the bullpen. But the rest of the bullpen all have earned a spot. I mean, you look at guys like Victor Gonzalez, who continues to come in. He not flashy, comes in and just really is lights out, does a really good job. And of course, Brusdar Graterol, a little more flash, but again, just really a consistent bullpen.
When you throw 200 miles an hour, you can have a little flash.
Yeah, exactly. Again, when you think about the bullpen, you think about pitching, you got Kenley Jansen. He too has had some issues in the championship, in this postseason. Where is he going to be? He looked good coming in. I think he came in on Sunday. He looked good, and hopefully that continues. Hopefully there's a better mindset for him. I know he struggled with not having the fans there, but in this case, you're playing for something. I mean, you were playing for something before, but now you're really playing for something. As far as on the bench, the only one that I can really think that, and I just mentioned him, is Gavin Lux. He has glimpses, very short little windows, and then they close, and he just doesn't need to be there. Not this time.
He's going to be, for the reasons we've talked about in the past, but also you don't know what the status with Jocelyn's going to be.
Right.
So you're going to keep him because there's not anybody else really that, sure, I think Edwin Rios has finally showed up as somebody they're going to want there. He got a chance to play quite a bit in this last series. They pulled Max out a couple times, and they pulled JT out, and he went in for JT. I don't see many changes, and I think Alex Wood probably is on there because there's nobody coming back off of the injured list, and they're going to want as many pitchers, and he has his moments.
Right.
Just like I think views Joe Kelly better than they had. They're not letting pitches long, so he doesn't have, and I've noticed that he's been throwing a lot of breaking stuff as opposed to fastballs, and he's getting better.
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah. Before they kind of just gave him, he was untethered. It's like, okay, we're going to let him go. Now they're actually using him as he should be used as a pitcher.
I think he
would. Yeah. He would probably say the same thing. This is when I need to be here, and I shouldn't be in these situations. Yeah. I think the roster that we've seen with the Dodgers is pretty much set. If you were watching the last game, that's pretty much. And I know Gavin Lux will be there. As I said, he's going to be somebody that'll be able to come off the bench. Edwin Rios definitely will be there. Kike Hernandez and Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor can play anywhere, and he's the real asset for
and proving it.
The Dodgers. Oh, yeah. Yep. Both defensively and offensively.
Yeah, surprisingly, in that last game, he struck out 3 times.
I know.
Which that was a surprise. That's why the 0 for 4s and that surprised me because that's not been their way. Before we move on to the Angels side of the story, let's get your player of the week, the final one of the 2020 season.
So this week I went with AJ Pollock. Over the 6-game series, he was 6 for 21. Doesn't sound spectacular. He was 286 batting average, but he hit 4 home runs. He had 5 RBIs. He's tied with Mookie Betts for the most home runs on the team at 16. He normally in a regular season hits 20, 21 home runs. So at this point, he's hit 16. His slugging percentage is at .566. He's behind Corey Seager in that, and he's also third on the team with 34 RBIs. But he's coming up not with just those home runs, but coming up with walks when we need it, and also, a single or double here or there, and doing well in the field defensively too. So for me this week, AJ Pollock.
Yeah, he's been very consistent. I considered AJ Pollock, but instead I went with Edwin Rios as my player of the week over 6-game span, and he's coming off the bench.
Right.
So that limited some. He went 4 for 9, so batted .444, scored 3 runs, hit 3 home runs, and drove in 4 runs. He slashed the .444. His on-base percentage was 1.556, and then that led to a 2,000 OPS, which is on base plus slugging. So he had a really good week. He showed overall that he could definitely help this team on to a COVID-19 championship.
Yeah, that's a good pick. He really is someone that you can put in there. Like you said, he came in off the bench multiple times in this series. And Earl Hershiser has now begun to call him Herman Rios, as Babe Ruth was Herman.
Well, I mean, those home runs, it seemed like every time he came up, he was hitting a home run. It didn't really, when you think back about it, oh, yeah, I remember, and he hit that home run. And didn't he hit the home run in the Zennings game back in Houston?
Yes, he did.
The leadoff 2-run home run?
Yeah.
All right, so the Dodgers will fire up their playoff season starting on Wednesday versus Milwaukee, all 3 games at Dodger Stadium. All right, so I had to get off the roller coaster. Things were going really good for the Angels towards the end of the season. In fact, over a 20-game span in September, the Angels had the best record in baseball. They had started to come on. All the complaints that Angels Nation had on Twitter and on the fan groups about Joe Madden doesn't know what he's doing, Billy Epler doesn't know what he's doing. And we talked about that to some extent. With Joe Madden, it looks like by the end we started to see what the plan was.
Yeah, you saw the magic of Joe Madden.
He was starting to kick a little butt, like I had been saying. No more of this, hey, buddy, let's do this. It's get out there and get this done. And towards the end of the season, when they saw that he saw and said, we still have a chance in the playoffs, he was setting Joe Adell. He was setting Shohei Ohtani. He was getting the best players out there who were having the best seasons at that point or were hitting better, whatever. He was putting his best foot forward. And going into the final weekend or this final week, they had to do a lot, but they had a chance. They needed not only to win out, they also needed the asterisks to lose out. And it was all possible because that first series with San Diego, they only won 2 series this year. We know that they didn't win any games versus the Dodgers because we just talked about that. But they beat the Asterix 6-4, which played into them still being in the because that meant they held the tiebreaker. And then the Padres, they split a season early on, and then the Angels go to San Diego, and Griffin Canning in game 1 comes out, throws 6 innings, 2 hits, 1 run, strikes out 10.
Yeah, career high for him.
Oh, yeah. And it was a 4-hitter total. The bullpen came in, did a great job, and they take out the Padres 4-2. Max Stassi, his first ever 4-for-4 night, hit 2 home runs, drove in 3 RBIs. He has proven, even though there's talk that they might go after like somebody like JT Realmuto or another bigger name catcher, another more solid catcher, I think Max Stassi made a case to be the everyday catcher. Even Anthony Bimboom came in, who played the next night, has been playing pretty well overall and is pretty quick with the throw down to second. So that's going to be a question. Do you go after, when you have 2, I say, potentially above average catchers, do you go after somebody else? That's a question for another day. But Max Stassi, great. Matt Walsh, once again, 1-for-4. So he's contributing. Taylor Ward, another one who was last week's player of the week, 2-for-4. And Rengifo, 2-for-3 with 2 doubles. So a lot of contributions there. I'm not sure. I think Davies and Lamet for the Padres, we'll see probably both of them pitch in the playoffs. Those are the 2 guys that are probably their aces, and they probably share that. Chris Paddock had been. Davies is like 130 pounds soaking wet, I think, and he looks like he should be pitching for some little league team from wherever he's from. He doesn't look like he's old enough to be in the majors, but he pitches well. He's definitely going to play a part in the playoffs. Yeah, your favorite Trent Grisham scored 2 runs because he got walked 3 times.
Yeah.
No hits. So they win that one 4-2. Of course, they have to win them all. So the next game, they come in, we send Jaime Barria to the mound. He only goes 2 innings, 3 hits, 2 runs. One of those was a home run. And Joe Madden asked after the game, why did you pull him? Because it didn't seem like he was doing that badly. He says, I could already see where we were going. And Joe showed a strength managing in the playoffs. He took the Tampa Bay Rays. He won a World Series with the Cubs. He sees those things. It's he's got his magic eye or his third eye or the crystal ball, or maybe he's just consulting his mood ring and his magic 8-ball. But you started to see what he could do with this team.
Yeah, before, when he was playing Joe Adele, or he was letting some of these guys in the starting pitching go longer than what they probably should have. I think it was just for him to get a feel of who these players are, because they had the shortened spring training, they had a summer warm up. You don't really get, and then some of the guys like Julio Teheran, he missed that. And then, so you're going off of his previous work, and that obviously did not show up this season. So yeah, in the final weeks of this season, you really did see why Joe Madden is one of the best managers in baseball.
Right. And so he really put it together. You started seeing it come together in this game. So when he pulls Barria, he brings in Patrick Sandoval, who, having pitched last year and this year, had never gotten a major league win. He pitched really well overall, gave up 2 hits in 3 innings, struck out 5, and picked up his very first win as the Angels sweep the Padres and win the series 3-1. Fletch, again, I think he's probably the team most valuable player. Walsh, though, 0-for-5. And in the past, you'd say, oh, okay, standard for these guys. Now you're like, what? What's happening? And he's only done everything that he's done in the month of September. It's not like he played the whole season and he had those numbers. That would have been spectacular.
David Fletcher has this great story where he wanted to play for the Angels growing up, and he's playing for the Angels. And
well, he's a hometown kid.
Yeah. And he's making the most of it.
Was born in Orange, which is a town that is adjacent to Anaheim and close to the stadium, the Big A. He went to school there, and now, I mean, that's cool. Shohei played that game and home run, 2 RBIs. J-Up, another home run on the season. And then Anthony Bimboom hit a home run as well and went 2-for-4. So all of that was great on the Angels side. The Padres, Mike Clevenger left after the first inning having an issue.
Yeah, it's not his elbow, but he did have forearm soreness. They did an MRI. Looks like he'll be back able to pitch. Will he pitch in the wild card? We'll have to wait to see. But I know they definitely want him going into the next rounds. But also Lamet had some issues, some soreness. And so he will be in the playoffs pitching. But you saw, Clevenger, the celebrated pitcher. They're like, oh, the Padres got Clevenger.
Well, everybody thought you would say that he was probably the biggest pickup of the trade season.
Yeah, but Clevenger does have injury issues. We saw that earlier in spring training. He had a knee issue. Now he's got this forearm issue. So that will remain to be seen how he figures into the Padres start. Will he be in the starting rotation?
All right. So we know that the Angels come out of this set with the Padres still with a chance to win or to go to the playoffs. They need the Rangers to shut down the Astros. The magic number for the Astros was 2 games. The Astros beat the Rangers the first game out. So it put a lot of pressure on the Angels going into LA for the final series. And they came out strong versus the Dodgers. Like I said, we talked about in Dodgers that Andrew Heaney came out, pitched okay. Bedrosian and Buttrey had perfect innings in the game. However, they couldn't put it together. And that was in after beating the Padres to help the Dodgers clinch the NL West and home field through the World Series. The Dodgers weren't willing to pay back the favor and help the Angels out to stop everybody's nemesis, the Asterix.
I think the Dodger fans were, at least I was okay with the Dodgers not winning
a lot of
series.
people on Twitter and Facebook all saying that I'm okay if you Dodgers, I'm okay if you lay down and let this go. They weren't going to do that.
No.
And really, they had their foot on the pedal the whole time because they didn't play guys who weren't getting any play time. They weren't trying Alex Wood out for a whole game. They continued on because they're going to the playoffs and they need to keep everybody in sync.
Yeah, that momentum going forward is so important. And I would, even the Dodgers, if they knew the situation, I would bet that some of the guys on the team were probably, think, well, maybe we just lose this one. That's not their mindset. But if it means the Asterix aren't in the playoffs, I think everybody's good with that.
Yeah. So the Angels came out strong, hit a lot of home runs at the beginning. Jared Walsh, Mike Trout, 3-run home run. Rendon 2 for 4, Jay up, Justin Upton with another home run. So they came out there strong, but they just couldn't hold on. Heaney gave up those 5 runs. He wasn't in a position to win it, but the Angels were in a position to win it, and then they just fell apart. And with that, honestly, I almost didn't watch the rest of the series because that was kind of the balloon deflated. And while the Angels were losing, the Rangers beat the Astros.
Yeah, that was the hardest
part. Spoiler alert. The Rangers did their job.
Yes.
They beat the Asterix the last 3 games of that 4-game set. Had the Angels won out against the Dodgers, the Angels, we'd be talking about them in the playoffs right now.
Right.
So in that first game too, the one thing that kept me going with all this was that I needed to watch, but I noticed that something kind of cool was about to happen. And even though the Angels were out of the playoffs, something else kind of fun to watch did happen, and that happened in game 2. Actually, it started at the end of game 1 when Luis Rengifo pulled a hamstring and was replaced late in the game. It was like in the 7th inning, replaced by Elliot Soto. And we'll talk more about him and his story in just a second. We'll talk about game 2. Julio Teheran wasn't scheduled to pitch. Here's one thing that the Dodgers didn't have to deal with in any of the 6 games. They never had to face Dylan Bundy, who was the Angels' ace. And he was scheduled to pitch the second game of the series, but because they were out of it, they sat Trout, Rendon, Pujols, Bundy, and Canning didn't end up pitching either. So they threw out Julio Teheran, only pitched the inning, gave up 2 hits, 3 runs. Hansel Robles, who was lights out as a closer last year, blew the save because there was a chance. It was 7-6. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered as far as a win in this game was just not getting swept and to at least won one game in there, which is redundant, what I just said. However,
Well,
Fletch, again, 3 for 5, a triple for Jared Walsh and a 2 for 5 game. Adele, who ended up playing and going into play his natural position of center field. And I got some things to say about him before we leave today. But he was 2 for 4. But here's the thing. We had two guys who had never started. Both had played in a major league game, but they'd never started. One was Jam Jones, or Jahmai Jones, who's one of our top prospects. My only issue with him is his hair.
wait, you have a problem with his
I
hair,
have
but you
a
like
problem with-
Uriel's hair
But yeah, I do.
or Uriel's hair?
Yeah, if you've seen his hair and look at Gurriel's hair, there's differences. But I like Jahmai Jones. He
I do
seems
too,
like
and
a
I
great
think his hair is
guy.
better.
But there's some about the way that his hair is that just kind of drove me up a wall.
Okay.
And then the other guy is Elliot Soto, who made his first start. So here's where the game is exciting to that point. It's close. But the fun part was Jahmai Jones, or Jam Jones as they call him, and Elliot Soto are hitting 8th and 9th, and back-to-back, they both get their very first at-bats, they get their very first hits. The other rookie playing this year, Joe Adele, took him 18 at-bats to get his first hit. These guys did it in their first. Now, Jam Jones, he's a rookie at that level of Joe Adele. He's just coming up. He's a younger kid. Elliot Soto is the story.
Yeah, he really
10
is.
years in the minor league, and he
Yeah.
finally gets his chance, and you watched him. Blanca loved him.
Yeah,
because
he's
there was a
great.
smile on his face. He played, there was joy. He was so happy to be there. And then to think about you come up to play your first game in Dodger Stadium, one of the
Yeah.
iconic stadiums. It would be like playing in Wrigley or Fenway to start. You're not playing in Tampa Bay for your very first game. Dodger Stadium. He was just the smile on his face. He got 2 hits that night. He was fun to watch. Went 2 for 3. Jam Jones got his first hit, scored 2 runs and his first RBI.
I would say too that when these guys got their first hit and hearing, the story where, especially Elliot Soto, where he's been 10 years in the minors, a lot of guys would have just hung it up. They would have, but he persevered. Like you said, made the first start in Dodger Stadium. Even the Dodgers were cheering for him when he got that first hit.
Well, did you see? I don't think it was Elliot. It was Jam Jones. He was at first base. He's all smiles and happy.
Yes.
And Cody asked him, "Was that your first hit?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah." And Cody was like, "Here, give me the ball." So, and he had gotten the ball, and he
Yes.
made sure he tossed it to the right guy because he understood that too. He remembers. It's not been that long ago for Cody. So that was really cool. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. Next day, Elliott didn't get any hits. Jam did, went 2 for 3. Shohei came in, got a hit. Once again, tough day. Patrick Sandoval, who looked so good in San Diego, had looked good in a couple others. In fact, he had shaved his beard off. And the first time they showed him, I was like, who's that? And then they moved out and I saw his number. I was like, oh, that's Patrick Sandoval.
It looks different.
Yeah, he did. He looked a lot different. He didn't look great. Gave up 3 runs over 2.5, 3 walks and a home run. What was good in the game, Luke Bard, Cam Bedrosian, and Jacob Barnes gave up 3 hits between the 3 of them and gave up no runs. They waited till Hobie Milner came in, who had his moments during the season. And the one thing that stuck with me, he's the guy that gave up the grand slam in Zennings in Oakland on the first game. And it always stuck with me all season because whenever he had a jam or was in a jam, that was a problem. So overall, they got blanked that day. Jam Jones, like I said, he had a good day. Nothing for Soto. Shohei was all right. It was a tough game. And as we get now that the season's over for the Angels and there's no playoffs, I know that Joe Madden was leaving. So they played Sunday. He was going to leave Monday to head back to his house in Pennsylvania, get in the motorhome and his summer home and head back to his permanent address and start working, because the big news that came out, like I think the third out had barely been recorded. I think the ball was barely in Cody's mitt, or who was at first base? Was Cody?
Kike.
Or Kike. That's right. Kike had come in and it was barely in his mitt, and they said the final score and they said Billy Epler's been fired.
Yeah.
All in that same sentence. They didn't waste any time. Billy, from hearing in the post game, had called Joe Madden the night before. He knew the night before. The weird thing is that I don't think that he ever got a real good shot at building the team. He did what he could dealing with a meddlesome owner. Artie Moreno is by far the issue. I'm not saying that Epler probably didn't make a bad move here or there, but his moves, you could see what he was trying to do. And sometimes they just don't work out. I think Julio Teheran in a regular season would have worked out better, but he gets heaped on with Trevor Cahill and Matt Harvey from last year that didn't do anything good. So that was kind of an odd moment that it happened so quick, but it wasn't surprising. A lot of people are saying Dave Dombrowski might be his replacement. I'm not sure that's going to work because Dombrowski has been Detroit, Boston, Montreal, and built great teams. He's going to want the autonomy to do it. I don't know that Artie Moreno is the guy to let him do it.
Well, but maybe he'll come in and just set Artie straight and say, listen, you're the owner and this is my job. This is what I do for a living. You pay. And I get the guys that are going to win the playoffs. Maybe he needs somebody to just tell him, listen, I get you're the owner, but, tell me in this situation, who are you going to get? I don't know that it would work because I think Artie Moreno probably wouldn't put up with it, probably just fire him.
You're right. I don't think it works simply because of the Peterson Stripling deal.
Yeah.
He got tired of waiting on something that it didn't matter whether or not he waited an extra week. And I believe that it did cost him. I don't know that Ross Stripling wouldn't have still had the issues that he ended up with, but he still would have been a good number 2 to Dylan Bundy.
Yeah. Yeah. It could have worked out a lot better for probably both of the guys. I mean, even Jocelyn he's a fixture, with the Dodgers, but he would have had everyday playing time.
And he would have stayed in the general area. He wouldn't have had to move. He wouldn't have had to uproot his family to do anything like Stripling ended up having to do.
Right.
And there's no guarantee that Jocelyn will be back next year.
No.
So the Angels have a lot of decisions what they're going to pursue, if they're going to try to hit the trade market. We know they need pitching, but right now we got to get a GM, and the GM and Joe Madden kind of get there. Joe Madden is one of those guys who goes, hey, I'm the manager. I manage what I'm given. But I'm sure he's going to want to be in sync with them to have at least an idea.
Well, and it's interesting for the Angels going forward. They really need to focus on pitching, but for the Mariners, their GM, he's looking at pitching. So you're going to have
former
Angel
Artie Moreno GM.
That's right. So now you've got the two teams in the West, and both of them had an opportunity to, make the playoffs. They had that late surge. And now they could be both going for the same pitchers.
Oh, no doubt. The part that's going to be interesting to see how things play out is Shohei Ohtani came to the Angels because of Billy Epler. He had met him when Billy was with the Yankees, and he was comfortable with him, and he came there. Mike Trout said he really likes Billy Epler, likes working with him. Now Billy's gone. Joe Madden was another one who really sang Billy's praises. Now he's gone. These guys are all pros. Shohei's the one that I wonder what will happen with more than Mike Trout, because Mike Trout signed there, but Mike Trout could find his way out if he wanted to be difficult about it.
Yeah.
And Joe Madden could just retire. But I think Joe Madden's there to bring a championship or get at least to the World Series with this team and have success year after year, because this was his dream job.
Yeah, and I think for me, looking at the Angels, especially in those stretch where they went 14-8, they looked really good, and you could see this team going forward. Obviously, looking at starting rotation and how that fits in and getting new pitching, but you really could see the Angels could be a force next season, but it all depends on what the owner allows.
Well, even with the
what
pitching,
he wants.
Even with the pitching, you were seeing improvement because all of a sudden we had 3 pitchers that Dylan Bundy was the most consistent. He had a couple of bad outings. Andrew Heaney was coming around and having more, and Griffin Canning as well. So who knows what a whole season could have been for these guys. So there are positives that we can look at, going forward. Before we get to Player of the Week, a couple other notes. David Fletcher led baseball in singles with 50 of them on the season. I said I was going to bring up Joe Adell. I will in just a second. Jared Walsh, Rookie of the Month for September. And then another guy that I had issues with out of the bullpen, but was much better than I gave him credit for, was the reliever of the month for September in Mike Myers.
Yeah.
Which normally when I hear Mike Myers, I think Halloween.
Halloween. That's right. I do too.
And he kind of
Spelled
turned
differently.
into that kind of a monster that he could, he was mowing people down.
I do have a question. You haven't mentioned him yet. Andrelton Simmons.
I didn't want to like completely bring it up because it's still, I'm worried about this. And part of me wanted to bring it up in the future. We'll do a wrap up for the season, but Andrelton Simmons decided after the last homestand to opt out of the final 5 games of the season. And in the statement that he put out, it sounded like he may be done as an Angel. And he said he wanted to play there. Joe Madden wants him to be there. Mike Trout has stated that he'd love for him to come back, and other players. I think Anthony Rendon even said, I love playing with him. I think David Fletcher, who will probably take over for him, is the one that probably wants him to be there the most, because I think Fletch plays better when he's moving around a little bit.
Yeah.
So don't know what to do with that news and where it's going to go.
Right. Now, because you have Billy Epler is gone, where does that leave Andrelton Simmons? He could, very well, he could come back. I don't know. Is he a free agent?
Yep.
After the season.
So we may have seen the last of him in Angels, but maybe not. But and then the other thing is it was probably more likely that Billy Epler would have chased him down. Who's to say that another GM, whoever, whether it be Dave Dombrowski or someone else, will chase after him, because he's 31. He's had ankle issues, but he played really well. He came back from this ankle issue and took him a couple of games to get back in, and then he did very well. So there's that. I wanted to stick to all the final notes here about stuff. And it's not that I forgot. I'm not ready to fully, I'm in mourning about Andrelton.
Well, but we just don't know what's going to happen, and it's still a possibility.
Like I said, that last message.
Yeah, the last message it didn't seem very positive, but we don't know. But also with Andrelton Simmons opting out, Elliot Soto was able to get in the game.
They were able to bring him up and have a feel-good story. Yeah, I mean, but Elliot Soto, unless something changes, is probably going to go back to the minors next year. And Jam Jones, too, are probably going to go back to the minors, depending on who they get. And if that's his first and his last name together.
I like it.
If Simba comes back, they're not going to be up there. I don't see those guys coming.
I could see another player that could be back in the minor league.
Yeah, he's the guy that was playing center field the last couple of games. And I wanted to bring him up, and I guess I'm talking about going negative, but Joe Adell played 38 games this season. He struck out 55 times. Mike Trout played 53 games and struck out 56 times. Only one more, and he played quite a few more games. But in comparison, and I looked at it in age and in number of games, nobody that played 38 games struck out more than Joe Adell. Vladdy Jr. played all 60 games, only struck out 38 times. He and Joe are both 21. Now, I know that Vladdy came up last year, and Vladdy is some kind of a phenom, but even Albert Pujols, who played one more game in the season, played 39 games to Joe's 38, only struck out 25 times, which was something. AP strikes out a lot, but in this case, he had a lot of ground ball. And it didn't matter because we forgot about all of his outs because he's number 5 on the home run list. So that was another positive this season. You got to see Albert hit a lot of milestones. You got to see Dylan Bundy show to be the pitcher that he was. We'll talk about all of that stuff in a wrap up for the season after the playoffs are all done. So no more Angels talk after today for the next few weeks, just because they're not in the playoffs. So let's get to the player of the week for this final week of the 2020 season. Who did you have?
I went with Max Stassi, and I finally said his last name right. Sassy Stassi.
You don't know how many times I just held back.
I know. I realized it, and then I'm like, wait a minute, it's Sassy platooning with Anthony Bim Boom, but good defensive catcher and offensively, 2 home runs, 3 RBIs, getting a single, getting a double. I liked what I saw, and I thought he was deserving of the Player of the Week for the Angels, because I think that the Angels don't need to go after JT Realmuto, who has injury issues. They don't need him. They've got 2 really good catchers, and focus on something else. Don't mess with the catching.
Yeah, we need a right fielder and pitching.
Yeah.
Not in that order. You know, it's interesting before we go, because Max Stassi and Jason Castro were kind of platooning the catcher spot. That was one thing that Joe Madden was good with, was alternating his catchers out. You never really saw catchers go more than a day or 2 without a break. So he kept them fresh. And Max Stassi, from the beginning of the season, was doing really well. All 3 of the players that were traded at the trade deadline are in the playoffs. Jason Castro with the Padres, Brian Goodwin with the Reds, and Tommy La Stella with the A's.
Oh, right. Tommy La Stella.
So
how can you forget him?
So they all went to the playoffs. So they can all thank Billy Epler for at least trading in the teams that were in a better situation.
Right.
Max Stassi's your Player of the Week. Max Stassi was on my radar as well, especially after that 4-for-4 game. I think I had overlooked him a couple of times where he may have been the Player of the Week candidate in the past. And I think too, because of his injury time, that was a little bit of an issue. But I thought about him. I thought about Mike Myers. But I went a completely different direction. And because there's no playoffs, because this was the last week, I decided to give the Player of the Week to 2 players. And it's only based on 2 games. I'm giving the Player of the Week to Elliott Soto and to Jam Jones.
I like it.
Both of them had, you figure that in the 3 games that Elliott Soto played, 2 for 6, batted .333, had a double, scored 2 runs. He was, like I said, drafted out of high school in 2007, went to Creighton, and was drafted again in 2010 by the Cubs. 20 years later, September 25th, 2020, he's in the bigs. And then Jam Jones, 3 for 7, batted .429, 1 RBI. So they get it. They both played pretty well in the field. And that'll wrap up the Angels season. Like I said, we'll do a full wrap up after the playoffs are all over for both the Dodgers and the Angels. All right, it's time for the final stroll around the league for the 2020 season. And as always, we'll start off in the East. And really, the teams that made the playoffs, that's easy. We've talked about them a lot. One player that we're both very familiar with and was on a team that I think was, if not the first team eliminated, the second team, the Boston Red Sox, who at one point we actually considered to be a team that would be in the playoff mix, or we thought would be up there.
Yeah. They were in my first. Yeah, they were in my first picks for the playoffs. My initial picks.
Right.
Yeah, and I was so wrong. But Alex Verdugo was a highlight for Boston this season.
He was so right.
He was. He was right. He ended up with a .308 batting average. He had 6 home runs, 15 RBIs, .367 on-base percentage, .478 slugging, and an .844 OPS. Not, anything that he's going to win awards, but for him to go into Boston and play well, especially because we don't know where Jackie Bradley Jr. will be.
No, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with that team. That's going to be a team I think that gets shaken up. And I kind of beg to differ with you about awards.
Okay.
Because Ron Renicky, who, by the way, is not returning next season, and apparently the odds-on favorite to replace him is a guy named Alex Cora.
Yeah.
We'll just leave that
doesn't
there
set right with me. But yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Ron Renicky said that Alex Verdugo was the clear MVP for the Red Sox this season. And Mass Live, a website that talks about the sports up in that area, they named him the team MVP as well as the Defensive Player of the Year.
Nice.
He and Jackie Bradley Jr. were kind of neck and neck, but they gave it to him. So, see, it may not have been league-wide awards, but on his own team, he showed up quite a bit on the highlight reel, diving catches. You'd see that he got a hit here or there. He wasn't the guy with the walk-off all the time. He wasn't a main player. Jackie Bradley Jr., Xander Bogaerts, a lot of times they would get those things. Former Dodger doing good there. Sure, he's not Mookie Betts, but he's trying to make them forget. And he's wearing Manny Ramirez's number.
When Boston got Verdugo, I remember the Red Sox fans were like, Alex Verdugo, who's this kid? And how wrong they were. Because we knew. We knew
that they were going to have some. And, the only thing that we could do was step back and look. If he'd be one of those guys that kind of pouted about having to go somewhere else, and he didn't. He's like, hey, I'm here to play baseball.
And he stepped in and did a really good job. And he's going to have a big role in Boston just because there's a lot up in the air for the Red Sox.
Another team to watch next year. I wouldn't be surprised if the Red Sox have issues again next year because you don't know the details of what's going on. They got rid of Mitch Moreland, who's doing well in San Diego. The other team that I think we got to watch out of the East will be the Orioles. They had some guys kind of stepping up. Santander was one guy that really stepped up. And there were others that showed that they really can put a team together. I think they get Chris Davis out of the mix. I think they're a team that are showing up. They're going to be maybe Mariners-like next season. So, all right, over in the NL East, Freddie Freeman. I don't know that he's a lock for the MVP, but when I looked at it, there's a lot of players out there who could be potential MVPs. Mookie, Corey Seager's been mentioned. I don't see Corey getting there, and we could talk about that later as to why. But with Freddie's, he's hitting well. He's clutch. He's been playing a great first base. He's good all the way around. And he was the player of the month for September. Not that makes him a shoo-in, but it's just showing what he's been doing for the Braves. And he hit his first Grand Slam this year.
That's right. And he's one of those guys that, we know who Freddie Freeman is, but we watch and look across, all the games. But a lot of people probably don't realize how good Freddie is as a first baseman, and then also offensively. In Atlanta, there's probably a statue of him, but he really outside of Atlanta, he probably been like, yeah, okay, Freddie Freeman, all right. But yeah, this year he's really come on like gangbusters. And this year, but you look at previous years too, it's not shabby, but he's really making a name for himself.
That's for sure. Another guy who's making a name for himself, not that he didn't already have one in St. Louis and then came to the Braves in the offseason, is Marcell Ozuna. This week, player of the week for the NL. Over the week, he hit 500, 3 home runs, 8 RBIs. He ended up leading the NL with 18 home runs, 56 RBI. So he topped out on that. And he also makes, along with Freddie Freeman, makes the Braves a tough team to face offensively with Albies and, of course, Ronald Acuna Jr. The problem they're going to have is pitching.
Yeah.
They've got injury issues. You figure Cole Hamels, who was one guy who was supposed to come in and be kind of that consistent veteran, was on the injured list, comes off the injured list, and goes right back on it. He was aspiring to be Aaron Judge, apparently. But at least he played one game before he went out to pitch. And so they're going to have issues, in the playoffs, and we'll see what happens after the first round. They do, of course, have the second seed, and we'll get to play games at home.
I do want to mention the Miami Marlins. They're in the playoffs, and of course, with they're playing the Cubs, and they were kind of the COVID villains this year, but making it into hodgepodging players in there. But Starling Marte, a player that they picked up, and he was almost hit in the head by a pitch. I believe it was on Sunday. And luckily he wasn't hit. What happened is the catcher came up, was really good, and it knocked his helmet off. But in the process, he got a left ear contusion. So how that will affect him being in the lineup is yet to be seen. going forward. If he's not in the lineup for the Marlins, that's going to be a huge hole in their
absolutely.
offense.
And also, when you talk about the Marlins, they lost one of their pitchers, Urania, got a line drive off of his arm, fractured his arm, so he's out. And that's two things. This is a team that had not been to the playoffs in 17 years. I mean, they overcame the whole COVID mess at the beginning. There's talks that Don Mattingly may be the manager of the year, based on what happened with the Marlins, even though his lack of institutional control at the beginning may have led to that. He's like the reliever that comes in and gives up runs so that it's tied. And then the next inning, the team scores. So he not only blows the save, but he gets the win.
Right.
He blew it at the beginning, but now he's going to get the win.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that they're playing the Cubs works out for them with these issues, because the Cubs are not as strong as you would think they would. They do have Chris Bryant has been heating up again, but he had been a problem. They're not a team that's always on it. They've been an up and down team, and that's why it took them till right at the end and some help to clinch the Central.
Yeah, they should have. We were waiting, like, when are they gonna clinch the Central? And it was right up until the end. Yeah, the Cubs are gonna be a team that'll be interesting to watch, because you do have, Chris Bryant is hitting. I think Javi Baez is getting back in there. They're also kind of an angry team. I think they know that they should have clinched a long time ago. They know maybe they should have a better record. And so anytime you talk to these guys, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, especially Chris Bryant, though, I mean, they come out and they're like, I don't care what anybody says, So if they come out with that same fire, I guess they could have.
Well, and at one point they were the number 1 seed.
Yeah,
ahead of the
that's
Dodgers.
True. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about the Central, Milwaukee has had, they had 2 different games where they had football-like scores. And then they were a part of another part of history where the Cubs no-hit them.
Yep.
And then they did the one thing that only happened once this season. And it was an interesting play in the way that it happened, because it doesn't always happen this way. It was textbook, but they had a triple play on the last game of the season.
Yeah, you just never hear of triple plays. Very rare. And for the Brewers to do it, the team that hasn't been, at 500, still isn't at 500 going into the playoffs, and then they have this cool triple play.
The playoffs would be the only place that they'd have to be over 500 to make it all the way through.
Yeah, that's
that
it.
That would probably be a first to finish under 500 and then win a World Series, or even the National League Championship, maybe even to win any playoff series. Yeah, they did that triple play against the Cardinals, and the part of it was, and a lot of times you see a triple play, it's a line drive, maybe to, second baseman, shortstop, something like that. They tap on second. They're able to triple off, as it were, the player that didn't get back to first in time. They were lucky it was Yadi Molina, who can't run very well. Really, when you look at it, that's what really helped, because it had been somebody faster, they would have made it. Line shot down to the third baseman, and then around the horn, third to second to first, and Yachty was still halfway to first when it got there. So either he didn't run it out full speed, because you would have thought he could have beat that, but he just ran slow, and they were able to get the triple play. But it was pretty.
Yeah,
it looked nice.
It was
if you
really
like
cool.
Double plays, that triple play was one better. It was pretty.
One of the interesting things, too, is you had the Cardinals and Brewers playing against each other, both celebrating on the field afterwards.
Right, because they both made the playoffs.
They
were both in front of their dugouts. It was funny. Yeah, that was crazy. All right, so closing up the Central, Player of the Week for the American League is Adalberto Mondesi, Raul Mondesi, former Dodgers son, picked up the Player of the Week honors, 615 batting average over the week, 655 on base percentage, 5 stolen bases, scored 10 runs, and he led Major League Baseball this year with 24 stolen bases.
Wow.
He picked that up, and then while he's picking up accolades in his early career, one of his teammates is ending theirs. After 14 years with the Royals, Alex Gordon announced he's retiring.
Yeah, he's a 7-time Gold Glove winner, left fielder, but decided.
3-time All-Star.
Yep. He's decided it's time to go home, spend some time with the family, hang out with the kids.
Led Major League Baseball in doubles in 2012 with 51. 2 World Series for him with 1 title. Grabbed that in 2015. 190 career home runs, 1,643 hits, 257 career batting average, and 749 RBIs. So happy retirement to Alex Gordon. All right, let's take a final look at the West. Not a lot to say about the Rockies or the Diamondbacks. The Rockies had that chance. Charlie Blackmon didn't get near 500.
No.
Didn't finish at the top of anything. In fact, we didn't talk about this, but DJ LeMahieu became one of the only players to win the batting title in both the American League and the National, and he won that with the Rockies. Charlie wasn't even in the top 5, I don't think. So it kind of fell apart, but so did their team. They had a lot of issues.
They came out like gangbusters, really looked like they were going to be the team to beat in the West. And yeah, you're right. They just fell apart. And I still do not understand why DJ LeMahieu is not a Rocky. Why they let him go. I mean, they've got good players. A lot of them I have had the opportunity to see here in the minors with the Isotope, but that one still is a head scratcher for me. But yeah, the Rockies, not where they had hoped they would end up.
D-backs, I think, are about where they thought they'd be. Maybe they thought they were actually at one point they were considered a playoff team, maybe towards the beginning of the season. Saw them play some good games. I think that Cole Calhoun settled in nicely there and may very well become Mr. D-back in the future as he goes. He's never going to be Mr. Angel because of Mike Trout kind of overshadowing him. But he's not a great hitter overall. But when he does, he goes through streaks. He's a streaky hitter. So let's wrap up with a team we love to hate. But I think we actually found some moments with the Giants that we were okay with. Johnny Cueto, just watching him pitch and some of the stuff he did and the character he is. Panda, when he was there, almost taking out Chris Taylor.
So glad he didn't. It would have been devastating.
And in keeping with our Alex theme today, we talked about Alex Verdugo. We talked about Alex Gordon. Let's give a little love to Alex Dickerson, especially since he was falsely accused of being COVID positive.
Yeah, had a lot of negativity his way, but he was very careful, had been very careful because his wife was pregnant, went on paternity leave, came off paternity leave, and he had dad power.
He was really solid throughout the whole season, but when he came back, you're right. He was one of those players that had that. 52 games for Alex Dickerson this year, 45 for 151, bringing him to a 298 batting average. And his fielding percentage was pretty nice, 985 overall. Now, my favorite player for the Giants, and I think you agreed with this, first Honduran player ever in Major League Baseball, Mauricio Dubon. 4 home runs on the season, hit 274, which is solid, 19 RBIs, an infectious smile, happy to be out there, and he played 3 different positions.
He has a fielding percentage of 947. And when you look at a fielding percentage, it's putouts plus assists divided by putouts plus assists plus errors. You think about the different positions that he played, 3 different positions. He had 1 error this season. 1. That's really saying something for the Giants, a really, a bright spot. You've got Yastrzemski, who leads the club in all of these different categories, but then you have Dubon, who loves to be out there and is doing a good job.
Center field, second base, shortstop. Those were the 3 positions he played this year, and he played them well. Obviously it's only his first year, but if he continues to have that same attitude in that, and he gets to play with like Yastrzemski, who's another guy who's younger and trying to build up. And the Giants have had a lot of success over the years. They need to reinforce some places, but they're not that far away from at least competing more. And maybe in the future, especially if they hold on to these expanded playoffs, being the 3rd team out of the West, because I don't see the Padres falling off as the future goes. And since Trevor Rosenthal, who was traded over to the Padres from the Royals, he's constantly posting about how great San Diego is.
I know, he loves it.
And if they're doing really well, the only thing that I had against him that I had a problem with is he asked if Mexican food in California was like Tex-Mex. And at that point, I wanted him to be shipped out because no, it's not Tex-Mex. It's authentic Mexican food. If you go to Mexico, you might find places in San Diego or in Southern California that have better Mexican food than they have in Mexico.
Well, then he would just be really confused if he ever came to New Mexico, because then you have new Mexican food and it is not Tex-Mex.
You know what? All you got to do is have some green chilies and you're good. What are you putting on your Captain Crunch? Some green chilies. I'm from New Mexico.
That's it. That's all you need.
All right, a couple of final notes about the Giants. Jeff Samardzija.
He had been out, was dealing with shoulder issues, had been on the injury list. They activated him and released him pretty much all on the same day. He does want to come back and pitch somewhere. He hasn't been bad, but I don't know.
No,
we'll
but you
see
kind of
where
forgot
he might
about
land. Yeah, this season definitely, and even last season, you just he, like I said, he's been battling with those shoulder issues. I think he had surgery last season. So yeah, almost like what happened to him.
When you look at the schedule for a day and you see the pitching matchups, there's sometimes like when you see Bieber's going to pitch. I'm going to try to check that game out if it's possible, or Kershaw, or, some of the different players, some of the different pitchers you think, oh, I want to go see this guy pitch. He stopped being one of those guys.
Right. He's not in that category anymore. So Hunter Pence, he's retired, left on his scooter into the sunset, but was in McCovey Cove on Sunday, rooting the Giants on to try to get into the playoffs, but it didn't work. So Hunter and his hair are gone.
He didn't help on the field. He didn't help off the field, but congrats to him on the retirement and on a great career. He was a fun guy to watch, even if you hated the Giants. He was a character.
Yep.
And that'll do it for this week's Sibling Rivalry Baseball podcast.
Remember, you can find us on our website, siblingrivalrybb.com, and on Facebook and Instagram at Sibling Rivalry BB.
We're also on Twitter at Sibling Rivalry BB without the A. Email us, show@siblingrivalrybb.com. We'd love to hear what you think, so subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to our podcast.
Next week on Sibling Rivalry Baseball, you got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em. We'll see how the wild cards played out.
I'm better at the knowing when to walk away and when to run part. Does that make me the coward of the county?
You're out!